In 1913, the United States government made a promise. They created a new institution called the Federal Reserve, designed specifically to stabilize the American dollar and prevent financial panics. The goal was crystal clear: protect the value of your money. But here's what actually happened. That same dollar, the one they promised to protect, lost 97% of its purchasing power over the next century. Let me put that in perspective. If your great-grandparents tucked away $1,000 in 1913, a small fortune back then, that same $1,000 today would buy you what just $30 could purchase in their time. 97% gone. And the strangest part? Most Americans never noticed it happening. They worked their entire lives as their wages seemed to go up, never realizing that the money itself was dying in slow motion. This is the story of the greatest financial sleight of hand in American history, the story you slept through while it fundamentally changed everything about how money works. If you're fascinated by the economic stories that shaped our world while most people weren't paying attention, this channel is for you. Please hit that like button and subscribe, because we're diving deep into the financial mysteries hidden in plain sight. And don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss these untold money stories. Chapter 1. When Money Was Real. To understand how we got here, we need to travel back to 1907. America had no central bank. Money was backed by gold and silver, meaning every paper dollar represented actual precious metal sitting in a vault somewhere. This system had rules. Banks couldn't just create money out of thin air. They'd have the gold to back it up. But in October 1907, everything fell apart. Speculative bubble and copper mining stocks burst, triggering what historians call the Panic of 1907. Within weeks, New York banks were failing. Ordinary people lined up by the thousands to withdraw their savings before their banks collapsed. The panic spread like wildfire. By the time the smoke cleared, dozens of banks had failed. The stock market had crashed 50%, and the nation's economy was in ruins. Here's where it gets interesting. The crisis was eventually stopped not by the government, but by one man, J.P. Morgan. The legendary banker personally organized other wealthy financiers to inject liquidity into failing banks. They literally saved the financial system with their own money. But it revealed something terrifying to the banking establishment. They needed a permanent solution, a lender of last resort. In November 1910, a secret meeting took place on Jekyll Island, Georgia. 6 men representing 1/4 of the world's wealth met under cover of darkness. They traveled in disguise, used only first names, and told no one where they were going. For 9 days, they crafted a plan. The plan would become the Federal Reserve System. But they faced a problem. Americans hated the idea of a central bank. The country had already tried it twice before, and both times the central banks were shut down because people believed they gave too much power to bankers and politicians. So these 6 men designed something clever. They would create a central bank, but call it the Federal Reserve System, making it sound like a government agency when it was actually a network of private banks. The plan worked. In December 1913, while most of Congress was on Christmas break, the Federal Reserve Act passed. President Woodrow Wilson signed it into law on December 23rd. The stated goals were noble: provide an elastic currency, serve as a lender of last resort during financial panics, and most importantly, maintain stable prices. In other words, protect the value of the dollar. The irony is almost painful. The institution created specifically to prevent panics would oversee the worst financial disaster in American history. The institution designed to stabilize prices would instead preside over their complete transformation. The institution meant to protect the dollar's value would, over the next century, reduce it to just 3 cents on the original dollar. Chapter 2. The Great Mistake. The Federal Reserve's first major test came less than 2 decades after its creation. In the 1920s, America was booming. The stock market soared, banks expanded lending, and speculation reached fever pitch. By 1929, stock prices had tripled in just 5 years. Everyone from shoeshine boys to bankers was playing the market. Behind the scenes, the Federal Reserve faced a dilemma. The stock market bubble was obvious, but Fed officials debated whether they should act. Some wanted to raise interest rates to cool speculation. Others worried this would slow the broader economy. They chose a middle path, doing just enough to avoid being blamed for either outcome. This indecision would prove catastrophic. On October 24, 1929, Black Thursday, the bubble burst. The stock market crashed, losing $40 billion in value, equivalent to $500 billion today. But here's what most people don't understand. The crash didn't cause the Great Depression. What? What followed was the real disaster, and it was entirely preventable. As banks began failing in 1930, the Federal Reserve had a choice. It could act as the lender of last resort, exactly what they were created to do, and inject money into the system. Or they could stand back and let nature take its course. Incredibly, they chose the latter. Between 1930 and 1933, over 9,000 banks failed. When your bank failed, your savings simply disappeared. There was no FDIC insurance back then. The Fed had the power to stop these failures by lending to struggling banks, but they didn't. Why? Fed officials believed that failed banks were weak banks, and allowing them to fail would strengthen the system. It was economic Darwinism applied to your grandmother's savings account. The consequences were devastating. As banks failed, the money supply contracted by 1/3. Imagine if 1/3 of all the money in America simply vanished overnight. Prices collapsed in what economists call deflation. When prices are falling, people stop spending because everything will be cheaper tomorrow. When people stop spending, businesses fail. When businesses fail, unemployment rises. It's a death spiral. By 1933, unemployment hit 25%. 1 in 4 Americans couldn't find work. Industrial production fell by half. Farm income collapsed. Bread lines stretched for blocks in every major city. This was the Great Depression, and it wasn't caused by the 1929 crash. It was caused by the Federal Reserve's failure to do the one job it was created to do. Later, Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke, a Great Depression expert, would admit, "Regarding the Great Depression, you're right. We did it. We're very sorry." Those words came in 2002, 70 years too late for the millions who suffered. Chapter 3. When gold became illegal, the Depression forced a radical transformation in how American money worked. In March 1933, newly inaugurated President Franklin Roosevelt faced a nation in collapse. Banks were failing so fast that he declared a bank holiday, a euphemism for shutting down the entire banking system. But Roosevelt went further. In April 1933, he issued Executive Order 6102, one of the most extraordinary government orders in American history. It made owning gold illegal. That's right, the United States government criminalized the possession of gold coins, gold bullion, or gold certificates by American citizens. You had until May 1st to turn in your gold to the government at the official price of $20.67 per ounce. If you refused, you faced a $10,000 fine, over $200,000 in today's money, or 10 years in prison, or both. Why did Roosevelt do this? The answer lies in the gold standard itself. Under that system, dollars were directly convertible to gold at a fixed rate. This limited how much money the government could create. Roosevelt wanted to inflate the money supply to fight deflation and stimulate the economy, but the gold standard stood in his way. By confiscating private gold and making it illegal to own, he removed one obstacle. Then came the real trick. Once the government had collected everyone's gold at $20.67 per ounce, Roosevelt revalued gold to $35 per ounce through the Gold Reserve Act of 1934, overnight. The government had effectively devalued the dollar by 41%. Anyone who had followed the law and surrendered their gold had just been robbed of 41% of their wealth. Those who had illegally kept their gold saw its dollar value increase by the same amount. This moment marked a fundamental shift. Money was no longer something real, something backed by physical gold that you could hold. It was becoming something else, a piece of paper whose value depended entirely on government promises. The Federal Reserve could now create money more freely, limited only by policy rather than gold reserves. The immediate effects seemed positive. The economy began recovering. Deflation stopped. Prices started rising again. But something profound had changed in the relationship between Americans and their money. The government had demonstrated that they could, by executive order, confiscate private wealth and manipulate currency values. The dollar had lost its anchor to physical reality. Most Americans, focused on surviving the Depression, barely understood what had happened. They knew they had to turn in their gold, and they complied. But they didn't grasp that this moment represented the beginning of the end for money as they knew it. Chapter 4. the slow burn begins. After World War II, the United States and its allies established the Bretton Woods system. Under this arrangement, foreign countries could convert dollars to gold at $35 per ounce, but American citizens still couldn't own gold. The dollar became the world's reserve currency. It's backed by the promise that it was good as gold. This system worked as long as the United States maintained discipline. But discipline was about to disappear. In the 1960s, President Lyndon Johnson launched the Great Society, a massive expansion of government spending on social programs. Simultaneously, America escalated its involvement in Vietnam, pouring billions into an increasingly unpopular war. The government was trying to fund both guns and butter military, spending in domestic programs without raising taxes enough to pay for either. The Federal Reserve faced a choice. It could refuse to enable this spending by keeping money tight, which would force the government to make hard choices. Or they could accommodate the spending by creating more dollars. They chose accommodation. The money supply expanded, and inflation began to creep upward. By the late 1960s, foreign governments noticed something troubling. America was creating far more dollars than it had gold to back them. France, under President Charles de Gaulle, began converting dollars to gold, followed by other nations. The United States was hemorrhaging gold reserves. At the current pace, Fort Knox would eventually be empty. In the summer of 1971, the situation reached crisis point. President Richard Nixon faced a decision that would change money forever. On August 15, 1971, he appeared on national television and announced that the United States would temporarily suspend the convertibility of dollars to gold. This Nixon Shock ended the Bretton Woods system. The temporary suspension has now lasted over 50 years and counting. What Nixon had done, though he didn't quite say it this way, was end the gold standard entirely. The dollar was no longer backed by anything tangible. It was now a pure fiat currency money, backed only by government decree and faith that others would accept it. The Federal Reserve could now create unlimited amounts of dollars, limited only by the theoretical constraint of maintaining confidence. The immediate consequences were dramatic. In the 1970s, inflation exploded. Prices rose by over 100% during the decade. Gas prices quadrupled. The price of gold, now free to float, skyrocketed from $35 to over $800 per ounce by MC1980. The dollar's purchasing power was melting away faster than at any time outside of outright war. Americans who had lived through this era remember the pain. Interest rates eventually hit 20%. Mortgage rates exceeded 18%. Inflation became the dominant economic issue of the decade. Chapter 5. The New Normal. By the early 1980s, the Federal Reserve, under Chairman Paul Volcker, finally took drastic action to stop runaway inflation. They raised interest rates to unprecedented levels, deliberately triggering a severe recession to break the inflation cycle. It worked, but it caused enormous pain. Employment exceeded 10%. Once inflation was tamed, a new era began. From the mid-1980s onward, the Federal Reserve pursued what they called price stability, maintaining inflation around 2% per year. 2% became the official target. Think about that number for a moment. They were openly announcing their intention to devalue your money by 2% every single year. And this was called stability. Here's the math they don't want you to think about. At 2% annual inflation, money loses half its value every 36 years. Over 72 years, roughly, one human lifetime money loses 75% of its value. This is considered normal, stable, and good monetary policy. But the real story is actually worse than 2%. The way the government measures inflation has changed dramatically over the decades. In the 1980s, the Bureau of Labor Statistics began adjusting how they calculated the Consumer Price Index. They introduced hedonic adjustments, which discount price increases if products improve in quality. They used substitution. If beef gets too expensive and people buy chicken instead, they count chicken prices rather than beef. Independent economists who calculate inflation using the old methodology estimate that real inflation has averaged closer to 6 to 10% annually in recent decades, not 2%, if that's accurate. The purchasing power decline has been even more dramatic than official statistics show. Meanwhile, something else happened that masked the effects of currency devaluation productivity increased dramatically. Technology, automation, and global trade made goods cheaper to produce. So even as the dollar's value fell, the actual prices you paid for many goods didn't rise as much as they otherwise would have. Your smartphone has more computing power than the room-sized computers of the 1960s, yet costs a fraction as much. This productivity improvement created an illusion of stability. But look at what couldn't be made more efficiently: housing, healthcare, and education. These sectors saw massive price increases because productivity improvements were limited. A house in 1971 cost the average family 3 times their annual income. Today, in many markets, it costs 10 times annual income or more. College tuition has increased 12 times faster than inflation over the past 4 decades. Healthcare costs have exploded. These are the areas where you can see the dollar's true loss of purchasing power, unmasked by technological improvements. And it's why younger generations face an economic reality dramatically different from their parents, even when raw wages seem higher. Chapter 6. What this means for you. So what's the practical lesson from this century-long story? First, understand that the purchasing power of cash always decreases over time. That $1,000 under your mattress is guaranteed to be worth less in 10 years than it is today. The Federal Reserve has explicitly told you they intend to make it worth less. This isn't conspiracy stated policy. This reality explains why wealthy people don't keep their wealth in cash. They immediately convert cash into assets: real estate, stocks, businesses, precious metals, things that can increase in value or at least maintain purchasing power as the currency devalues. The wealthy play an entirely different game than the middle class, and they're playing it specifically because they understand what's happening to the dollar. The tragedy is that ordinary working people are the ones most hurt by currency devaluation. If you're paid in dollars, save in dollars, and have no investments, you're on a treadmill that slowly moves backward. Even if you get a 3% raise every year and inflation is officially 2%, you're barely breaking even. If real inflation is higher than official statistics suggest, you're falling behind while thinking you're getting ahead. Second, this history reveals something crucial about government promises. In 1913, they promised to protect your dollar. In 1933, they promised your gold confiscation was temporary and necessary. In 1971, they promised the end of gold convertibility was temporary. Every promise was broken. The lesson isn't that government is evil, but that when political expediency conflicts with monetary restraint, expediency wins every time. Third, understand that this story isn't finished. The dollar has lost 97% of its value over the past century, which means it has just 3% left to lose before it reaches zero. While it's unlikely to go to absolute zero, the trend is clear. The question isn't whether the dollar will continue losing purchasing power. It will, by design, but rather how fast and whether there will be periods of acceleration. The Federal Reserve was created to stabilize the dollar and prevent financial panics. Instead, it presided over the dollar's near-complete destruction of purchasing power and the worst financial crisis in American history. This isn't ancient history, it's the ongoing story of your money happening right now, whether you notice it or not. The people who understand this story position themselves accordingly. They don't save money, they save assets. They don't trust promises, they trust historical patterns. They don't sleep through economic history, they learn from it and act. If stories like this, where we uncover the economic events that shaped our world while most people weren't paying attention, fascinate you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because we're just getting started with these financial, educational mysteries.